When 28-year-old Harper Hawk Sinclair became the youngest female sniper commander in her military family's four-generation legacy, she thought she was honoring her father's memory. But when a routine training mission turned into an assassination plot, Harper discovered that her father's compass, her most treasured possession, contained evidence of war crimes that could destroy everything she believed in. Caught between family loyalty and military honor, Harper would have to make the most impossible shot of her career, one that wouldn't save lives but would expose the truth. Sometimes the hardest target to hit isn't the enemy in your crosshairs, it's the hero you thought you knew. Hit that like button if you believe the truth is worth any sacrifice, and subscribe for more incredible military stories that will challenge everything you think you know about honor duty and the price of family loyalty. Daddy was a war criminal. Female snipers 1 500-yard shot exposes family's darkest secret. The morning mist clung to Fort Bragg like a shroud, and Harper Hawk Sinclair could taste the weight of 4 generations watching her every move. At 28, she stood barely 5'6" in her combat boots, but her ice-blue eyes held the kind of steel that made grown men step aside. Today, those eyes burned with a mixture of pride and terror as she stared at the silver compass in her palm, the same compass that had guided her great-grandfather through Normandy, her grandfather through Korea, and her father through Iraq. The compass was all she had left of Colonel Marcus Sinclair, and today it would guide her through her first mission as the youngest female sniper commander in the unit's history. Sinclair. The bark came from Colonel James Morrison, a man whose gray mustache had been perfectly trimmed every day for 37 years. His weathered face carried the map of a dozen conflicts, and his eyes held no warmth for the young woman standing at attention before him. You ready for this, or should I find someone with actual field experience? Harper's jaw tightened. She'd been hearing variations of that question for 6 months, ever since her promotion had been announced. The whispers followed her everywhere: diversity, higher political appointment, daddy's little girl playing soldier. None of them seemed to remember that she'd outshot every man in her class at sniper school, or that she'd earned her call sign Hawk for her ability to spot targets that others missed entirely. Sir, I'm ready to serve, sir, she replied, her voice steady as granite. Morrison's laugh was dry as desert sand. We'll see about that. This isn't some training exercise, Sinclair. Real bullets, real consequences. He dropped a manila folder on his desk with a sound like a coffin lid closing. Operation Silent Thunder. You'll be briefing your team in 20 minutes. As Harper reached for the folder, Morrison's hand shot out covering hers. His grip was like a vice and his voice dropped to a whisper. Listen carefully, girl. This mission came down from very high up, Pentagon level. You follow orders to the letter, no improvisation, no cowboy heroics. We clear. Something in his tone made Harper's skin crawl. In all her years of military training, she'd never heard a colonel sound quite so nervous. But she nodded. Crystal clear, sir. Good. Morrison released her hand, and Harper noticed a slight tremor in his fingers. Because if this goes sideways, it's your head on the chopping block, not mine. 20 minutes later, Harper stood before her 4-man sniper team in the briefing room, the weight of command settling on her shoulders like lead armor. The men before her represented the best the Army had to offer. Staff Sergeant Jake Reaper Williams, a 35-year-old veteran with arms like tree trunks and eyes that never missed anything. Sergeant First Class Tom Ghost Patterson, who could disappear into terrain so completely that his own mother couldn't find him. Corporal Danny Scope Martinez, barely 21, but with a gift for long-range calculation that bordered on supernatural. And Sergeant Mike Steele Henderson, the team's spotter and communications specialist, whose steady voice had guided more successful missions than anyone could count. They sat in metal folding chairs, their faces a mask of professional neutrality, but Harper could read the skepticism in their posture. Reaper's arms were crossed, his massive frame leaning back in a way that suggested he was humoring a child. Ghost stared at a point somewhere over her left shoulder, as if she weren't worth looking at directly. Scope fidgeted with his notebook, and Steele's fingers drummed a nervous rhythm against his knee. Gentlemen, Harper began, opening the folder with hands that refused to shake. Operation Silent Thunder is a high-priority training exercise designed to test our rapid response capabilities in an urban environment. She paused, studying the mission parameters. Something felt wrong. The target coordinates placed them in a small town in Nevada, supposedly abandoned military housing that had been converted into a training facility. But the intel photo showed signs of recent habitation clothing on lines, vehicles in driveways, children's toys scattered in yards. The scenario involves a hostage situation. Harper continued, pushing down her unease. Foreign nationals have taken control of a residential compound. Our job is reconnaissance and elimination of high-value targets while ensuring zero civilian casualties. Reaper finally leaned forward, his dark eyes locked on Harper's face. Ma'am, with respect, what makes this different from the dozen other urban training ops we've run this year? Harper looked down at the briefing papers again. The mission had an unusual classification level for a training exercise, and the rules of engagement were surprisingly flexible. Most training ops came with strict limitations on ammunition and tactics. This one seemed to give them carte blanche. The difference is, Sergeant Williams, is that this exercise is being monitored by Pentagon officials. Our performance will directly impact future funding for the sniper program. The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but she pressed on. We deploy at 0300 hours tomorrow. Full combat load, suppressed weapons only. Ghost spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper. Ma'am, who's running oversight on this op? Harper flipped through the pages looking for the answer to a question that should have been obvious. When she found the oversight section, her blood turned to ice water. The mission was classified at a level that meant no external monitoring, no safety protocols, no backup teams. For a training exercise that was not just unusual, it was unprecedented. Oversight is limited due to the sensitive nature of the training scenario, she said carefully. Steele's drumming fingers stopped abruptly. Ma'am, I've been running comms for 8 years. I've never seen a training op with this kind of communications blackout. We're talking complete radio silence, except for emergency frequencies. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Harper could feel the walls closing in as the pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to solve began clicking into place. This wasn't a training exercise. The Pentagon-level classification, the communications blackout, the flexible rules of engagement, this was a real operation disguised as training. But why the deception? And why had she been chosen to lead it? Harper's mind raced back to her conversation with Morrison, to the tremor in his hands and the fear in his voice. She thought about the timing of her promotion, how it had come through so quickly despite the obvious resistance from her superiors. She thought about her father's compass sitting heavy in her pocket like a guilty secret. Sir, Scope's young voice cut through her thoughts. Are we expecting any civilian presence in the target area? Harper looked down at the intel photos again, this time focusing on details she'd initially dismissed. The vehicles in the driveways weren't military surplus or training props. They were civilian cars, family sedans, and pickup trucks. The clothing on the lines included children's garments. The toys in the yards showed signs of recent use. Her throat felt like sandpaper. Negative, Corporal, the area has been cleared for training purposes. But even as she said the words, Harper knew she was lying. Someone was lying to her, and now she was lying to her team. The question was whether she would continue to be part of the deception or find the courage to dig deeper. After dismissing the team, Harper sat alone in the briefing room, staring at the mission folder. She pulled out her father's compass, letting the familiar weight ground her in the storm of uncertainty. Marcus Sinclair had been a war hero, a man who had served 3 tours in Iraq and come home with a chest full of medals and a head full of nightmares. He died when Harper was 22, a training accident that had robbed her of the chance to really know the man behind the uniform. The compass was sterling silver engraved with the Sinclair family motto, truth above all. Her great-grandfather had carried it through World War II, her grandfather through Korea, her father through Iraq. Now it was her turn to carry the weight of family tradition. But what happened when truth and duty pointed in opposite directions? Harper opened the compass, watching the needle swing toward magnetic north with the steady reliability that had guided 3 generations of Sinclair men through the fog of war. As she tilted it toward the light, she noticed something she'd never seen before. Tiny scratches along the inner rim, so faint they were almost invisible. They looked like numbers, but the markings were too small to read without magnification. A knock on the door made her jump. She quickly closed the compass and looked up to see Reaper standing in the doorway, his massive frame filling the space. "Ma'am, you got a minute?" Harper nodded, gesturing to a chair. Reaper closed the door behind him and sat down, his movements careful and deliberate. I've been in this unit for 12 years, he began, his voice low and serious. I've run black ops, white ops, and every shade of gray in between. This mission doesn't smell right. Harper felt a mix of relief and terror wash over her. If Reaper had noticed the inconsistencies, then she wasn't losing her mind. But it also meant that whatever was happening was bigger and more dangerous than she'd imagined. What specifically concerns you, Sergeant? Reaper pulled out his own copy of the mission briefing pages, covered with his meticulous handwriting. The target coordinates. I ran them through satellite imagery from last week. That's not an abandoned training facility. It's a functioning residential area. Maybe 100 people, including kids. Harper's hands went cold. Are you certain? Ma'am, I stake my 20-year pension on it. Someone's setting us up to hit civilians and call it training. Reaper's eyes met hers directly. The question is whether you're part of it or not. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Harper understood now why Morrison had been so nervous, why the mission had such unusual parameters. Someone up the chain of command wanted civilians killed and was using her team to do it. But why? And why her? I'm not part of anything except serving my country, Sergeant. But I think we need to find out what's really going on before we deploy tomorrow. Reaper nodded slowly. That's what I was hoping you'd say, ma'am, because I've got some ideas about where we might start looking for answers. Over the next hour, Reaper laid out a web of connections that made Harper's blood run cold. The mission had been fast-tracked through channels that bypassed normal oversight. The target coordinates corresponded to a small Nevada town where an investigative journalist named David Chen had been staying while researching a story about military contractors and illegal weapon sales. Chen's been digging into some heavy stuff, Reaper explained, pulling up printouts of news articles on his tablet. Defense contractors selling weapons to both sides in conflicts, military officials taking bribes, the whole 9 yards. Word is he was close to publishing something that would bring down some very important people. Harper stared at the photo of David Chen, a slight, balding man in his 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like someone's accountant, not the target of a military assassination. You think they want us to kill a journalist? I think they want us to kill anyone who threatens the gravy train, ma'am. And they're using your team because if something goes wrong, it's easier to blame a female commander than a male one. Plausible deniability. The words hit like a slap. Harper had always known that her gender made her a target for criticism, but she'd never imagined it would make her a scapegoat for war crimes. So what do you suggest, Sergeant? Reaper leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. We have two choices, ma'am. We can follow orders and hope no one finds out we killed innocent people, or we can find a way to turn this around and expose whoever's pulling the strings. Harper fingered her father's compass through her pocket. Truth above all, the family motto seemed to mock her now. How could she choose truth when it might destroy her career and put her team in danger? If we go against orders, we're talking about court-martial at best, treason charges at worst, she said quietly. Yes, ma'am, but if we follow orders, we're talking about murder. And once you cross that line, there's no going back. Harper closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 4 generations of military service pressing down on her. Her great-grandfather had stormed the beaches of Normandy to fight fascism. Her grandfather had frozen in Korean trenches to stop communist expansion. Her father had served 3 tours in Iraq to bring democracy to the Middle East. What would they do in her situation? She opened her eyes and met Reaper's gaze. What's your plan? We deploy as ordered, but we modify the mission once we're on the ground. Instead of eliminating targets, we extract the journalist and anyone else who might be in danger. Then we use whatever evidence Chen has been gathering to expose the whole operation. That's assuming Chen is still alive when we get there. It's assuming a lot of things, ma'am, but it's the only play that lets us sleep at night. Harper pulled out the compass again, opening it and staring at the needle. North, always pointing toward truth, even when truth was the most dangerous direction. All right, Sergeant, but we do this my way. No unnecessary risks, no cowboy heroics. We get in, assess the situation, and make our decisions based on what we find. If Chen is in real danger, we extract him. If he's safe, we abort and find another way to handle this. Reaper smiled for the first time since entering the room. Roger that, ma'am. What about the rest of the team? We bring them in slowly. Start with Steele. If we're going to modify communications protocols, we need him on board first. Then Ghost and Scope. Harper closed the compass with a decisive snap. And Sergeant, not a word of this to anyone else. If we're right about this conspiracy, we don't know how deep it goes. As Reaper left to begin preparations, Harper sat alone with the weight of her decision. Tomorrow she would either save innocent lives or destroy her military career. There was no middle ground, no safe choice that would let her avoid consequences. She thought about her father, wondering what he would do in her situation. Marcus Sinclair had been a by-the-book soldier, a man who followed orders without question and trusted that his superiors knew best. But he'd also been a man who died carrying secrets that he'd never shared with his daughter. What if those secrets were the key to understanding why she'd been chosen for this mission? Harper pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for her father's old unit commander, General Patricia Hayes. Hayes had been Marcus Sinclair's mentor and friend, and if anyone knew the truth about his service record, it would be her. The call went to voicemail, but Hayes called back within minutes. "Harper, is that really you? How long has it been? 6 years?" "Something like that. General, I need to ask you about my father." There was a long pause. "What kind of question?" "The kind that might get me in trouble for asking." Another pause, longer this time. "Not over the phone. Meet me at the Waffle House on Bragg Boulevard in 1 hour. Come alone." The line went dead, leaving Harper staring at her phone and wondering what secrets her father had taken to his grave. An hour later, Harper sat across from General Hayes in a corner booth, watching the older woman's weathered hands wrap around a coffee cup like it was an anchor in a storm. Hayes had always been intimidating, 6 feet tall with silver hair and eyes like Arctic ice. But tonight she looked almost fragile. "Your father was a good soldier," Hayes began without preamble. "One of the best I ever commanded, but Iraq changed him." "Changed him how?" Hayes stared into her coffee for a long moment. Marcus started asking questions that good soldiers aren't supposed to ask. About mission objectives, about intelligence sources, about who was really benefiting from our operations there. Harper felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of questions? The kind that got him transferred to a desk job stateside. The kind that made certain people very nervous. Hayes looked up, meeting Harper's eyes. "Your father stumbled onto something in Iraq, something involving weapons sales and contract fraud. He tried to report it through proper channels, but the investigation got buried." "By who?" "People with more stars on their collars than I'll ever have." Hayes leaned forward. "Harper, why are you asking about this now? What's happened?" Harper made a decision that would change everything. She told Hayes about the mission, about the target coordinates, about her suspicions regarding David Chen. She watched the general's face grow pale as the pieces clicked into place. "Son of a bitch," Hayes whispered. "They're using you to finish what they started with your father." "What do you mean?" "Marcus didn't die in a training accident, Harper. He was murdered. Shot by a sniper during a live-fire exercise, but the investigation was classified and the file was sealed." Hayes reached across the table, gripping Harper's hand. "Someone wanted him dead because of what he knew, and now they're using his daughter to eliminate the journalist who's picked up where he left off." The diner seemed to spin around Harper as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Her father hadn't died accidentally. He'd been executed for trying to expose corruption. And now she was being set up to complete his assassin's work. Who ordered his death? "I don't know for certain. The investigation was taken over by military intelligence, and everyone involved was either transferred or retired. But I have my suspicions." Hayes pulled out a small notebook, tearing out a page and sliding it across the table. "These are names of people who were involved in the Iraq contracts your father was investigating. If you're going to expose this thing, start there." Harper looked at the list, recognizing several of the high-ranking officers and defense contractors. At the top of the list, in Hayes's careful handwriting, was a name that made her blood freeze: Colonel James Morrison, her commanding officer. The man who'd briefed her on the mission. The man whose hands had trembled when he'd told her to follow orders to the letter. "Morrison killed my father. I can't prove it, but he was the one who assigned Marcus to that training exercise. He was the one who had access to the live-fire schedule, and he was the one who classified the investigation before any real evidence could be gathered." Harper stared at the list, feeling the weight of her father's compass in her pocket. Truth above all. Now she understood why he'd carried that motto to his grave. What should I do? Hayes was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant with memory. Your father tried to work within the system and it got him killed. If you're going to finish what he started, you're going to have to be smarter and more careful than he was. Meaning, meaning you gather the evidence first, then you act. You make sure you have enough proof to bring down the entire network, not just one or two players. Hayes leaned back, your expression grim, and you watch your back every step of the way. These people have already killed once to protect their secret. They won't hesitate to kill again. As Harper drove back to base, her mind raced with possibilities and dangers. Tomorrow's mission was no longer just about saving a journalist. It was about exposing the conspiracy that had killed her father and preventing others from dying to protect corrupt officials. But first, she had to survive long enough to gather the evidence. Back in her quarters, Harper opened her father's compass again, this time using a magnifying glass to examine the tiny scratches she'd noticed earlier. Under magnification, the marks resolved into numbers coordinates, she realized. GPS coordinates that had been carefully etched into the metal. Using her laptop, Harper entered the coordinates and waited as the mapping software processed the location. When the image loaded, her heart stopped. The coordinates pointed to a location in Iraq near a small village called Al-Rashid. According to the timestamp on the satellite imagery, the photo had been taken in 2005 during her father's second deployment. But what she saw in the image made no sense. Instead of a village or military installation, the coordinates marked a large crater in the desert, the kind of crater left by a massive explosion. Surrounding the crater were the scattered remains of vehicles and buildings and what looked like a large pile of debris that could have been. Harper's hands shook as she zoomed in on the image. The debris wasn't random wreckage. It was organized, arranged in neat rows like graves, like a mass burial site. Whatever her father had discovered in Iraq, it was something worth killing for. And now, 12 years later, someone was still willing to commit murder to keep it buried. Harper closed the laptop and pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found Reaper's number. When he answered on the second ring, she could hear the tension in his voice. "Ma'am, we still on for tomorrow?" "We're on, Sergeant, but the mission parameters have changed. We're not just extracting a journalist. We're exposing a conspiracy that goes back over a decade." There was a pause. "How big a conspiracy are we talking about?" Harper looked down at the compass in her palm, thinking about her father and the secret he died protecting. "Big enough to kill for Sergeant. Big enough to change everything." "Roger that, ma'am. What do you need me to do?" "Get the team ready for the most important mission of our lives. And Sergeant, make sure everyone understands that once we start down this path, there's no turning back." As Harper ended the call, she made a promise to her father's memory. Tomorrow she would finish what he'd started. She would expose the truth, no matter the cost. The compass needle pointed steadily north, toward truth, toward justice, toward a reckoning that was 12 years overdue. But first she had to survive the night. The Nevada desert swallowed sound like a hungry beast, and Harper Hawk Sinclair could feel the weight of 4 generations of military honor cracking under the pressure of what she was about to discover. The pre-dawn darkness stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by the distant glow of the target town and the soft green light of her night vision scope. 3 hours ago, her team had deployed from Fort Bragg with orders to conduct a training exercise. Now lying prone on a ridge overlooking what was supposed to be an abandoned facility, Harper watched civilian families sleeping peacefully in their homes, unaware that they were about to become collateral damage in someone else's war. "Reaper, what's your count?" Harper whispered into her comms, her voice barely audible even to herself. "I've got visual on 17 structures, ma'am. 12 show signs of active habitation. I'm seeing kids' bicycles, fresh laundry vehicle movement from earlier today." Staff Sergeant Williams' voice carried the steady calm that had earned him his call sign, but Harper could hear the underlying tension. "This isn't a training facility." Ghost confirmed Reaper's assessment, and Sergeant Patterson's response came like a whisper from beyond the grave. "Confirmed. I've been watching for 30 minutes. Saw a woman checking on children in one of the houses. Family bond in another yard. Ma'am, we're looking at a legitimate residential area." Harper's stomach twisted into knots. The mission briefing had been explicit: eliminate high-value targets in an abandoned training facility. But the intelligence was either catastrophically wrong or deliberately falsified. Steele, what's our communication status? Radio blackout is in effect, ma'am. Emergency frequencies only, and even those are being jammed from somewhere local. We're effectively cut off from command. Sergeant Henderson's voice carried a note of concern that made Harper's skin crawl. Ma'am, I've never seen jamming equipment this sophisticated in a training scenario. Scope, what do you see through your lens? Corporal Martinez adjusted his position slightly, his rifle scope trained on the target area. Ma'am, I've got eyes on what looks like our primary target. Small house third from the left. There's someone inside lights on, looks like they're working late, but he paused. Ma'am, that person matches the description of David Chen, the journalist we briefed about. Harper felt the pieces of a deadly puzzle clicking into place. This wasn't a training exercise. It was an assassination mission disguised as military training. Someone high up the chain of command wanted David Chen dead and was using Harper's team to do the killing. Team hold position. Reaper on me for a private channel. Harper switched to a secure frequency that would allow her to speak privately with her senior NCO. Jake, we need to talk about what we're really doing here. I was hoping you'd say that, ma'am. This whole operation stinks worse than a week-old MRE. How much did you figure out? Enough to know we're being set up to commit murder and call it training. The question is what we do about it. Harper pulled out her father's compass, the silver metal cold against her palm in the desert night. The tiny coordinates etched inside pointed to a mass grave in Iraq, evidence of war crimes that someone had been willing to kill to protect. Now, 12 years later, that same someone was using his daughter to eliminate a journalist who'd gotten too close to the truth. We're going to find out what Chen knows, and we're going to make sure he survives to publish it. That's a court-martial offense, ma'am. So is murdering civilians, Sergeant. I'd rather face a court-martial than live with blood on my hands. There was a long pause. What's the plan? We approach the target house, extract Chen, and get him somewhere safe while we figure out our next move. But first I need to tell the team what we're really dealing with. Harper switched back to the team frequency. Listen up, all of you. What I'm about to tell you stays between us, but you have a right to know the truth before we proceed. Over the next 10 minutes, Harper laid out everything she'd learned, the connection to her father's death, the conspiracy involving defense contractors, the real reason they had been sent to kill David Chen. She watched through her scope as her team absorbed the implications of what she was telling them. So what you're saying, Scope's young voice was tight with anger, is that our own command wants us to murder an American journalist to cover up war crimes. That's exactly what I'm saying, Corporal. Ma'am, Steele's voice crackled through the comm. If we go against orders, we're talking about desertion, insubordination, possibly treason. Our careers are over. If we follow orders, we're talking about murder, Sergeant. Our souls are over. Ghost spoke up from his position, his voice carrying the weight of 15 years in special operations. Ma'am, I've done things in the name of national security that I'm not proud of. But I've never killed an innocent person, and I'm not starting tonight. Reaper, I'm with you, ma'am. My oath was to support and defend the Constitution, not to murder journalists for corrupt officers. Scope, count me in. My little sister wants to be a reporter someday. I won't be part of killing someone for doing their job. Steele. There was a long pause. Ma'am, this is crazy. If we do this, there's no going back. You're right, there isn't. Are you with us or not? Another pause. Damn it, yes, ma'am. But for the record, this is the stupidest thing I've ever done. Harper felt a surge of pride in her team mixed with terror at what they were about to attempt. All right, here's how we play this. We approach the target house, make contact with Chen, and assess the situation. If he's in immediate danger, we extract him. If not, we gather intel and figure out our next move. Ma'am, Ghost interjected, I've been watching the area. There are at least 6 hostiles positioned around the perimeter. They're not military, more like private contractors. They're armed, and they've been watching Chen's house for hours. Harper's blood turned to ice. You're saying we're not the only ones here? Negative. Someone else is running a parallel operation, and based on their equipment and positioning, they're here to make sure Chen doesn't survive the night. The mission had just become exponentially more complicated. Not only did they have to extract a journalist, they had to do it while fighting off professional killers who were being paid to ensure he died. Reaper Ghost, you take the north approach. Scope Steel, you're with me on the south. We coordinate our movement to neutralize the hostiles before they know we're here. Ma'am, Steele's voice was tight. We don't know who these contractors are working for. They might be American citizens. They're armed mercenaries preparing to murder a journalist sergeant. That makes them enemy combatants. Harper began moving down the ridge, her team flowing like shadows across the desert terrain. Years of training had taught them to move as one organism, each member instinctively knowing where the others would be. Tonight, that training would be used against their own command structure. As they approached the outer perimeter of the town, Harper's night vision picked up the heat signatures of the contractors Ghost had spotted. They were professionals positioned at key vantage points with overlapping fields of fire. But they were expecting a target, not a counter-assault. Reaper, can you make out any identifying marks on the hostiles? Negative facial recognition from this distance, ma'am, but their equipment looks like Blackwater surplus. High-end gear, military-grade weapons, coordinated positions. These aren't random mercenaries. Harper's mind raced through the implications. Blackwater, now known as Academy, was a private military company that had been involved in numerous Iraq War controversies. If they were involved in tonight's operation, it meant the conspiracy reached into the private sector as well. Ghost, what's your assessment of the tactical situation? 6 hostiles, 3 teams of 2. They've got the house surrounded, but they're focused outward, expecting threats from the desert, not from other military units. If we hit them fast and hard, we can neutralize them before they can coordinate a response. Do it. What followed was a ballet of violence that lasted less than 3 minutes. Harper's team moved with deadly precision, their suppressors turning gunfire into whispered death. Ghost materialized behind one contractor like his namesake, his knife ending the threat silently. Reaper's massive hands turned necks with surgical efficiency. Scope's young face remained calm as he put precision shots through the hearts of men twice his age. When the shooting stopped, 6 contractors lay dead in the Nevada sand, their million-dollar equipment useless against soldiers who fought for conviction rather than money. House is clear, Ghost reported. No additional threats visible. Harper approached the front door of David Chen's house, her rifle at low ready, but her mind focused on what she might find inside. The journalist's life held the key to exposing the conspiracy that had killed her father, but only if he was still alive to share what he knew. She knocked softly on the door. Mr. Chen, my name is Commander Harper, Sinclair, United States Army. I'm here to get you out of danger. There was a long pause, then the sound of locks turning. The door opened to reveal a slight, balding man in his 50s, been wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a rumpled shirt. David Chen looked exactly like the photos in his file, but his eyes held a fear that spoke of weeks or months of living with a target on his back. Commander Sinclair, his voice was barely a whisper. How do I know you're not here to kill me? Harper holstered her sidearm and pulled out her military ID. Because if I was here to kill you, you'd already be dead. I'm here because I think you have information about my father, Colonel Marcus Sinclair. Chen's eyes widened with recognition. Marcus Sinclair's daughter, my God, I've been trying to contact you for months. I have something that belongs to you. Something your father wanted you to have. What kind of something? Chen gestured for her to enter, glancing nervously at the dead contractors scattered around his property. Evidence. Documents. Proof of everything your father died trying to expose. Harper entered the small house, her team taking up defensive positions around the perimeter. Chen's living room looked like a war room with maps, photographs, and documents covering every surface. String connected various pieces of evidence, creating a web of conspiracy that stretched from Iraq to the highest levels of the Pentagon. Your father contacted me 6 months before he died, Chen explained, pulling out a thick manila envelope. He discovered something in Iraq that he couldn't report through normal channels. War crimes, contract fraud, deliberate targeting of civilians for profit. Harper stared at the envelope, recognizing her father's handwriting on the address. Why didn't he go to his commanding officers? Because his commanding officers were part of the conspiracy. Chen opened the envelope, revealing hundreds of photographs, documents, and witness statements. Your father discovered that Colonel Morrison and several other high-ranking officers were taking bribes from defense contractors to falsify battle damage assessments. Villages that were supposedly destroyed by enemy action were actually being bombed by American forces to create demand for reconstruction contracts. The photos were horrific aerial shots of destroyed villages, mass graves filled with civilian casualties, American soldiers posing with weapons that had supposedly been captured from enemies, but still had their factory packaging. How many people died? Conservative estimate 3,000 civilians over 2 years. Men, women, children, entire families wiped out to pad corporate profit margins. Harper felt sick. Her father had discovered that his own command was committing genocide for money, and when he tried to expose it, they'd had him killed. There's more, Chen continued, breathing out a second envelope. Your father wasn't the only one who tried to speak out. 7 other soldiers attempted to report what they'd seen. All of them died in training accidents or enemy action within 6 months of filing their reports. 7 military families had lost fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters because they tried to do the right thing. 7 funerals with folded flags and empty promises that their loved ones had died serving their country. Why haven't you published this? Because every time I get close, people try to kill me. I've been moving constantly for 8 months, staying one step ahead of assassins. Tonight was supposed to be different. I had a meeting arranged with a contact at the Washington Post, someone who could get this story the protection it needed. Harper's radio crackled. Ma'am, we've got vehicles approaching from the east. Military convoy, at least 6 Humvees, looks like a full platoon. Chen's face went pale. They found me again. Through the window, Harper could see the headlights cutting through the desert darkness. In minutes, this quiet residential area would become a war zone with innocent families caught in the crossfire. Steele, what's our communication status? Still jam, ma'am, they're not taking any chances. Harper made a decision that would change everything. Mr. Chen, we're getting you out of here. But first I need to know, do you have copies of this evidence stored somewhere safe? Multiple copies, multiple locations, but the originals are here. Then we're taking everything. Harper turned to her radio. All teams prepare for emergency extraction. We've got a full convoy coming in hot, and we are not leaving without our package. Ma'am, Reaper's voice carried concern, that convoy probably has our relief orders. If we run, we're officially AWOL. If we stay, Mr. Chen dies and the truth dies with him. I'd rather be a living deserter than a dead accomplice to war crimes. Harper helped Chen pack his evidence into 2 large duffel bags while her team prepared defensive positions. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, punctuated by the whine of helicopter rotors in the distance. Ghost, what's your count on the approaching force? 30-plus hostiles, mixed military and private contractor units. They've got heavy weapons and air support. Ma'am, we're seriously outgunned. Harper pulled out her father's compass, watching the needle point steadily north toward truth, toward justice, toward a fight that would either expose the conspiracy or get them all killed. Reaper, is there another way out of this town? Negative on vehicle access, ma'am. We'd have to go on foot across the desert, but that would expose us to air units. Then we make our stand here. Harper turned to Chen, who was clutching his evidence bags like they were life preservers. Mr. Chen, how badly do you want this story to see daylight? Badly enough to die for it. Good, because that might be exactly what happens. The first Humvee rounded the corner just as Harper finished setting up her firing position. Through her scope, she could see Colonel Morrison in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, his face illuminated by dashboard lights. The man who had killed her father was personally overseeing the operation to kill his daughter. All teams hold fire until my command. Let them get close enough to talk. The convoy stopped 50 meters from Chen's house, and Morrison emerged from his Humvee with a megaphone. Commander Sinclair, this is Colonel Morrison. You and your team are ordered to stand down immediately and surrender David Chen for processing. Harper keyed her radio. Colonel Morrison, this is Commander Sinclair. David Chen is an American citizen and a journalist. He's under military protection. Commander, you are in direct violation of orders. Surrender Chen immediately or face court-martial for insubordination and treason. Harper stepped outside the house, her rifle at low ready, but her voice carrying across the desert night. Colonel, I know what you did to my father. I know about the war, crimes in Iraq. I know about the money and the cover-ups and the murdered soldiers. Morrison's laugh echoed across the sand. Your father was a traitor, Harper, just like you're turning out to be. My father was a patriot who died trying to expose war criminals. You killed him because he discovered the truth about al-Rashid. The name hit Morrison like a physical blow. Even at 50 meters, Harper could see him stagger. Al-Rashid was the village coordinates hidden in her father's compass, the mass grave that held the evidence of systematic genocide. You don't know what you're talking about. I know that you and your friends murdered 3,000 civilians to inflate reconstruction contracts. I know that you killed 7 American soldiers to cover it up. I know that you had my father assassinated to protect your secret. Morrison's response was to raise his sidearm and fire 3 shots in Harper's direction. The bullets sparked off the concrete beside her head. You saw it as she dove for cover. All teams, we are weapons free. Repeat, weapons free. The firefight that followed would later be called the Nevada Incident, a brief but brutal engagement between corrupt military officials and the soldiers who refused to be part of their crimes. Harper's team held superior defensive positions, but Morrison's force had overwhelming numbers and air support. Scope's rifle sang its deadly song, dropping contractors with precision shots that defied his young age. Ghost seemed to teleport between positions, his suppressed carbine whispering death to anyone who tried to flank their position. Reaper and Steele laid down covering fire that kept the attackers pinned, while Harper coordinated their defense. But numbers mattered, and Morrison had them in abundance. "Ma'am, we can't hold this position much longer," Steele reported. "They're bringing up heavy weapons." Through her scope, Harper could see Morrison coordinating with helicopter pilots preparing for an aerial assault that would level the entire block. Innocent families slept in houses that would soon become collateral damage in a war between truth and corruption. All teams prepared to fall back. We're not sacrificing civilians to protect ourselves. That's when Chen made the decision that would change everything. "Commander, I'm going to surrender myself." "Like hell you are. If I give myself up, Morrison gets what he wants, and you can escape to fight another day. The evidence is more important than my life." Harper grabbed Chen by the shoulders, looking into his eyes. "Mr. Chen, if you surrender to Morrison, you'll be dead within an hour, and all this evidence will disappear forever." "Then what do you suggest?" Harper looked at her father's compass one more time, its needle pointing steadily north toward truth, toward courage, toward the hardest decision of her life. "We broadcast everything. Right now. Tonight. The communications are jammed. Military communications are jammed, but cell towers are still active." Harper pulled out her personal smartphone. "Mr. Chen, do you have contacts in the media who would publish the story immediately if you sent it to them?" "Several, but they'd need verification documentation." "Steele, can you patch my phone into the local cell network?" "Ma'am, that's possible, but they'll triangulate our position immediately." "They already know our position, Sergeant. The question is whether we can get Chen's evidence uploaded before Morrison's helicopters turn us into pink mist." What followed was the most desperate 15 minutes of Harper's military career. While her team held off increasing numbers of attackers, Chen and Steele worked frantically to upload gigabytes of evidence to secure servers around the world. Photographs of mass graves, documents detailing financial corruption, witness statements from murdered soldiers, all of it, flowing through civilian networks that Morrison couldn't control. "Upload complete," Steele announced, just as rocket-propelled grenades began impacting around their position. "The evidence is out there." Harper felt a surge of triumph mixed with the certainty that they were all about to die. They'd accomplished their mission, but the price would be their lives. That's when her father's compass began to vibrate. Not the gentle tremor of a magnetic needle finding north, but a rhythmic pulsing that felt almost like a heartbeat. Harper opened the compass and stared in amazement as the hidden coordinates began to glow with a faint phosphorescent light. "What the hell?" she whispered. The coordinates weren't just marking a location in Iraq. They were marking a location that was precisely aligned with their current position in Nevada. Her father hadn't just hidden evidence of war crimes. He'd hidden something that could only be activated from this exact spot at this exact moment. "Reaper, I need you to take these coordinates and triangulate our position with the GPS markers my father left." "Ma'am, now might not be the best time for treasure hunting." "Trust me on this one, Jake." As Reaper worked with the coordinates, Harper realized what her father had done. 12 years ago, knowing that he might not survive to see justice done, Marcus Sinclair had created a failsafe, a way for his daughter to access evidence that went beyond even what Chen had gathered. Ma'am, the coordinates point to a location about 200 meters north of here. There's an old mining claim abandoned for decades. That's where we're going. All teams fighting withdrawal to the north. We're heading for the mining claim. Ma'am, that's moving away from any possible extraction point. Sometimes you have to go deeper into danger to find your way out, Sergeant. As Harper's team began their tactical retreat, fighting off Morrison's forces while protecting Chen and his evidence, the compass in her pocket pulsed with increasing frequency. Whatever her father had hidden in the Nevada desert was calling to his daughter across 12 years of secrecy and death. The mining claim turned out to be a shaft that descended deep into the earth, its entrance hidden by decades of accumulated debris. But as Harper approached with her father's compass, she could hear something impossible, the sound of electronic equipment humming to life. Steele, are you picking up any electromagnetic signatures? Ma'am, there's definitely something electronic down there. Looks like a power source and some kind of transmission equipment. Harper looked back at Morrison's forces now, less than 100 meters away, and closing fast. She looked at Chen clutching his evidence bags with desperate determination. She looked at her team, 4 soldiers who had risked everything to stand with her against corruption. We're going down. The shaft was deeper than it appeared from the surface, dropping 30 feet into a natural cave system that had been carefully modified. Emergency lighting activated as they descended, revealing a hidden installation that looked like it had been waiting for Harper's arrival. At the center of the cave sat a sealed metal container, its surface marked with the Sinclair family motto, "Truth above all." And beside it, a piece of equipment that made Harper's heart stop, a military-grade satellite uplink, still functional after more than a decade of waiting. "My father built a backup plan," she whispered. Chen approached the container reverently. "Commander, I think your father was a much smarter man than anyone realized." As Morrison's forces surrounded the mining claim above them, Harper opened the container that her father had left for her to find. Inside were documents that made Chen's evidence look like child's play financial records, showing the conspiracy reached to the highest levels of government, photographs proving that defense contractors had been deliberately prolonging conflicts for profit, and witness statements from dozens of soldiers who had been silenced before they could expose the truth. But most importantly, there was a letter addressed to Harper personally. "My dear daughter," it began, "if you're reading this, it means the corruption I discovered has finally come for our family. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this burden, but I know you have the strength to finish what I started. The evidence in this container will bring down everyone involved in the Al-Rashid massacre, but only if it reaches the right people." The letter went on to provide detailed instructions for using the satellite uplink to broadcast the evidence simultaneously to news organizations, congressional oversight committees, and international human rights groups. Her father had spent months setting up a network that couldn't be stopped or suppressed. "Steele, can you operate this equipment?" "Ma'am, this is more sophisticated than anything I've seen." Your father was definitely thinking ahead. As Steele worked to activate the satellite uplink, Harper could hear Morrison's forces preparing to assault the mining claim. They had minutes, maybe less, before the cave became their tomb. Chen started organizing the most damning evidence first. "We may not have time to transmit everything." What followed was a race against death itself. While explosions echoed down the shaft and dust rained from the cave ceiling, Harper and her team uploaded 12 years of hidden evidence to networks around the world. Financial corruption, war crimes, murder, all of it, flowing through satellites that Morrison couldn't reach or stop. "Transmission complete," Steele announced just as the first ropes dropped down the shaft. "The evidence is out there, ma'am, all of it." Harper looked around the cave at her team, knowing that they'd accomplished something extraordinary. They'd exposed a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of government. They'd vindicated her father's memory. They'd given David Chen the chance to tell the story that would change everything. But they were still 30 feet underground with an army of corrupt soldiers and contractors preparing to kill them all. "Reaper, what's our tactical situation?" "Grim, ma'am, multiple hostiles descending the shaft, no alternate exits, and limited ammunition." Harper pulled out her father's compass one final time, watching its needle point steadily toward true north. Truth above all. They'd honored that motto even if it cost them their lives. "All teams prepare for final defense. We hold this position and protect Chen until help arrives." "Ma'am," Ghost's voice carried a note of dark humor, "what makes you think help is coming?" Harper smiled grimly as she checked her rifle's magazine. Because the evidence is out there now. Because the truth is finally free. And because sometimes doing the right thing is its own reward regardless of the consequences. As Morrison's forces reached the cave floor and the final battle began, Harper Sinclair knew that she'd fulfilled her father's legacy. The compass that had guided 4 generations of Sinclair warriors had led her to the most important mission of her life. Not the mission to kill, but the mission to expose the killers. The shots that followed would echo far beyond the Nevada desert, reaching newsrooms and congressional hearing rooms where the truth would finally have its day. Death came to the Nevada desert in the form of muzzle flashes and desperate prayers, but Harper Hawk Sinclair had stopped counting bullets and started counting heartbeats. Each thrum of her pulse marked another second that the truth remained alive in the world above, spreading through networks that Colonel Morrison could never reach or destroy. 30 feet below ground in her father's hidden sanctuary, Harper crouched behind an overturned equipment crate while gunfire echoed off cave walls like thunder from the gods. Her team had been fighting for 20 minutes against impossible odds, protecting journalist David Chen, and the evidence that would bring down a conspiracy spanning 2 decades. But 20 minutes felt like 20 hours when you were outnumbered 10-1. "Scope report," Harper whispered into her comm, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of combat. "Down to my last magazine, ma'am. I count 12 hostiles still active in the main chamber." Corporal Martinez's young voice remained steady despite the blood streaming from a shrapnel cut on his forehead. "But I've been watching their movement patterns. They're getting sloppy aggressive. Morrison's pushing them too hard." Harper nodded grimly. Desperation made men dangerous, but it also made them stupid. Morrison knew that every minute the firefight continued increased the chances of outside intervention. Local law enforcement would eventually investigate the gunfire. Federal agencies would notice the unauthorized military operation. The story that Chen had broadcast would gain momentum with each passing hour. Reaper status. Holding the North Tunnel, ma'am, but barely. These contractors aren't your average mercs. They're moving like Tier 1 operators. Staff Sergeant Williams' massive frame was wedged into a narrow passage, his body armor scarred by repeated impacts. Whatever Morrison's paying them, it's enough to buy loyalty beyond reason. Ghost. South Tunnel is secure, but I'm reading movement in the cave system beyond our perimeter. They might be trying to flank us through natural passages. Sergeant Patterson's voice seemed to float from the shadows themselves. "Ma'am, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but they're bringing down heavy equipment. Sounds like cutting tools." Harper's blood went cold. If Morrison's forces could cut through the cave walls, they could bypass the defensive positions entirely. The natural fortress that had protected them would become their tomb. "Steal any word from topside. Negative on outside communications, ma'am. The jamming equipment is still active, and I can't risk exposing our position to make contact." Henderson's voice carried the weight of 20 years in communications operations. But the satellite uplink completed its transmission cycle. The evidence is out there in multiple locations. David Chen looked up from his position behind a pile of his father's documents, his wire-rimmed glasses cracked from flying debris. "Commander, how long can we hold this position?" "As long as it takes, Mr. Chen. Your story is worth more than our lives. But not more than the lives of innocent people." Chen gestured toward the ceiling, where the sounds of the firefight would be audible to the families living in the town above. "We've accomplished our mission. The truth is out there. Maybe it's time to consider surrender." Harper looked at her father's compass, its needle pointing steadily toward magnetic north, despite the chaos surrounding them. Truth above all. The family motto seemed to mock her now, asking whether she was willing to sacrifice everything for an ideal that might already be lost. That's when she heard it, a sound that changed everything. Sirens, multiple vehicles approaching fast from the east. "Steal you picking up those sirens." "Affirmative, ma'am. Sounds like law enforcement, maybe federal response. They're moving toward the town at high speed." Harper felt the first flutter of hope she'd experienced since entering the cave. If federal agents were responding to the situation, it meant that Chen's broadcast had reached the right people. It meant that the conspiracy was about to face scrutiny from agencies that Morrison couldn't control. All teams knew mission parameters. "We hold position until federal response arrives. Do not engage unless directly threatened." "Ma'am," Reaper's voice carried concern, How do we know the federal response isn't working for Morrison? It was a valid question. The conspiracy had reached high levels of government. There was no guarantee that the responding agents weren't part of the cover-up. We don't Jake, but it's the best chance we've got. The sound of cutting equipment grew louder, accompanied by Morrison's voice echoing down the shaft. Sinclair, last chance to surrender. Come up now and I'll make sure your team faces military justice instead of a shallow grave. Harper keyed her radio to broadcast on all frequencies. Colonel Morrison, this is Commander Sinclair. Federal law enforcement is responding to this location. Any harm that comes to American citizens will be investigated by agencies outside your control. Morrison's laugh was bitter as desert wind. You think the FBI gives a damn about one corrupt journalist and some treasonous soldiers? This goes higher than you can imagine, little girl. Your father learned that lesson the hard way. The mention of her father sent rage coursing through Harper's veins like liquid fire. She'd spent her entire military career trying to live up to the legacy of a man she'd believed died serving his country. Now she knew he'd been murdered for trying to expose the very people she'd sworn to serve. My father was twice the soldier you'll ever be, Morrison. He died protecting innocent people. You kill them for profit. Your father died because he forgot that loyalty matters more than truth, the same lesson you're about to learn. The cutting equipment broke through the cave wall with a sound like breaking bones. Harper watched as the first contractor squeezed through the opening, his weapon already trained on Chen's position. Time slowed to a crawl as Harper made the most important decision of her life. She could take the shot. Her rifle was loaded, the target was clear, and her training screamed for her to eliminate the threat. But killing the contractor would escalate the situation beyond any hope of peaceful resolution. Instead, she did something that went against every tactical instinct she'd developed over 8 years of military service. She stood up. I'm Commander Harper Sinclair, and I'm surrendering myself in exchange for the safety of David Chen and my team. The contractor's finger tightened on his trigger, but Morrison's voice crackled through his earpiece. Hold fire. Bring her up. As Harper moved toward the breach in the cave wall, her team's voices exploded through her comm system. Ma'am, negative. We don't abandon our commander. Harper, get down. We can fight our way out. Commander, this is not the mission. Harper turned to face her team one last time, these 4 men who had risked everything to stand with her against corruption. The mission is protecting the truth. You've done that. Now trust me to finish what my father started. She handed her rifle to Reaper and pulled out her sidearm, placing it on the ground at her feet. Steele, you're in command. Protect Chen until federal response arrives. That's an order. Ma'am, I can't. You can and you will, Sergeant. Take care of your men. As Harper climbed through the breach into Morrison's custody, she carried only one thing, her father's compass. Its weight a reminder of 4 generations of military service that had led to this moment. The ascent to the surface felt like climbing out of her own grave. Morrison's contractors handled her roughly, but Harper's mind was focused on the sounds from above, sirens growing louder, helicopter rotors that didn't belong to Morrison's forces, and voices shouting commands in the crisp tones of federal law enforcement. When she emerged from the mining shaft, Harper found herself in the middle of a standoff that would define the rest of her life. Morrison stood 20 meters away, his sidearm drawn, but not aimed on, while FBI agents in tactical gear surrounded the entire operation. Special Agent Sarah Martinez stepped forward, her badge gleaming under the harsh portable lights that had turned night into day. Colonel Morrison, you and your men are ordered to stand down immediately. This operation is being conducted without proper authorization on American soil. Morrison's face was a mask of barely controlled rage. Agent Martinez, this is a classified military operation. You have no jurisdiction here. We have jurisdiction wherever American citizens are being threatened by unauthorized use of military force. Martinez gestured toward Harper. Release Commander Sinclair immediately. Sinclair is under arrest for treason, insubordination, and violation of the Espionage Act. Based on what charges filed by what authority, Martinez's voice carried the steel of someone who had faced down worse men than Morrison. Because according to our records, no charges have been filed, no warrants have been issued, and this entire operation exists outside normal command structure. Harper watched the exchange with growing amazement. The FBI wasn't just responding to the crisis, they were actively investigating Morrison's operation. Chen's broadcast had reached not just news organizations, but federal agencies with the authority to act on the evidence. Agent Martinez. Harper called out, her voice carrying across the desert night. I have information regarding war crimes committed by Colonel Morrison and his associates. I request federal protection as a whistleblower under the Military Whistleblower Protection Act. Morrison spun toward her, his weapon now aimed directly at Harper's chest. You say another word, and I'll shoot you for attempting to escape custody. Colonel Morrison. Martinez's voice cut through the tension like a blade. If you fire that weapon, my agents will respond with lethal force. Stand down immediately. The standoff stretched across seconds that felt like hours. Harper could see Morrison calculating odds, weighing the consequences of murder against the consequences of exposure. She could see the moment when he realized that his conspiracy had finally been exposed to agencies beyond his reach. But instead of surrendering, Morrison made a choice that revealed the depth of his corruption. He pulled the trigger. The shot that rang out across the Nevada desert came not from Morrison's weapon, but from a rifle positioned on a nearby ridge. Harper watched in amazement as Colonel Morrison dropped to his knees, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers as blood spread across his chest. Ghost to Hawk, came the whisper through her earpiece, which she'd somehow managed to keep during her capture. Target eliminated. You're clear to move. Harper looked toward the ridge where Ghost had positioned himself, invisible to everyone except the target he'd been hunting. Her team hadn't abandoned her. They'd been protecting her from a distance, ready to act the moment Morrison became a direct threat. Medical team to the colonel's position, Agent Martinez called out, but Harper could see from Morrison's glazed eyes that Ghost's shot had been precisely placed. The man who had killed her father was beyond medical help. As FBI agents secured the scene and medics tended to Morrison's body, Harper found herself face to face with Agent Martinez. Commander Sinclair, we've been monitoring your situation since David Chen's broadcast reached our offices 2 hours ago. The evidence you transmitted has initiated investigations at the highest levels of government. What happens now? Now you and your team are placed under federal protection while we sort out the extent of this conspiracy. Based on the preliminary evidence, we're looking at charges against dozens of military officers and defense contractors. Harper pulled out her father's compass, its needle pointing steadily north toward truth, toward justice, toward a future where corruption would face consequences. Agent Martinez, I need to ask you something. My father, Colonel Marcus Sinclair, was his death really an accident? Martinez exchanged glances with another agent before responding. Commander, based on what we've learned in the past few hours, your father's death is being reclassified as a homicide. We believe he was murdered to prevent him from exposing the al-Rashid massacre and related war crimes. 12 years of wondering, 12 years of living with half-truths in classified investigations finally resolved in a single sentence. Harper's father hadn't died in a training accident. He'd been assassinated for trying to do the right thing. Will there be justice for him? There will be justice for all of them, Commander. Your father, the murdered soldiers, the civilian victims, everyone who died because of this conspiracy will be remembered and honored. As dawn broke over the Nevada desert, Harper stood with her team watching FBI agents process evidence from the underground cache her father had prepared. David Chen was already on his way to Washington under federal protection, his story gaining momentum with each hour that passed. Ma'am, Reaper approached carefully. What happens to us now? Harper looked at each of her men. Reaper with his steady calm, Ghost with his deadly precision, Steele with his unwavering loyalty, and Scope with his young courage. They'd risked everything to stand with her against corruption, and now they faced an uncertain future. I don't know, Jake. Military careers are probably over. We'll face investigation, possible court-martial, maybe prison time. Any regrets, ma'am? Harper opened her father's compass one last time, watching its needle point toward true north. The coordinates hidden inside had led her to evidence that would bring behind one of the largest military conspiracies in American history. The truth that had cost her father his life would finally see daylight. No regrets, Sergeant. We did the right thing, even though it cost us everything. Harper thought about her father's letter, about the burden he'd carried alone for years before his death. She thought about the families who would finally learn the truth about their murdered loved ones. She thought about future soldiers who would serve in a military cleansed of the corruption that had stained it for decades. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything you have. That doesn't make it less right. 6 months later, Harper Sinclair stood before a congressional hearing committee, her hand raised in oath before God and country. The hearing room was packed with journalists, family members of murdered soldiers, and government officials whose careers would be ended by her testimony. Commander Sinclair, the committee chairman, began. Do you swear to tell the truth? The whole truth and nothing but the truth regarding the events known as the Al-Rashid conspiracy? I do. Harper's testimony would last for 6 hours, covering everything from her father's hidden evidence to Morrison's attempt on her life. She spoke about war crimes and cover-ups, about murdered journalists and assassinated soldiers, about a conspiracy that had reached the highest levels of American government. When it was over, when the last question had been answered and the final document entered into evidence, Harper walked out of the Capitol building into bright Washington sunlight. Her military career was over. Her security clearance revoked, her future uncertain. But the truth was finally free. David Chen's story had won 3 Pulitzer Prizes and led to the largest military corruption investigation in American history. 17 officers were court-martialed, 12 defense contractors faced federal charges, and congressional oversight of military operations was fundamentally restructured. Her father's name was cleared, posthumously added to a memorial wall for soldiers killed in the line of duty. The 7 other murdered whistleblowers were similarly honored, their families finally receiving the answers they'd been denied for years. Harper's team faced various fates. Reaper retired with full honors after his testimony proved crucial in exposing the contractor network. Ghost disappeared into civilian life, his precise skills finding new purpose in private security. Steele became an advocate for military whistleblower protection, using his communications expertise to help other soldiers report corruption safely. Scope finished his degree and became a journalist himself, inspired by Chen's example. But Harper's greatest vindication came on a cold December morning when she received a package with no return address. Inside was a simple compass identical to her father's, with an engraving that read, "Truth above all, Colonel Marcus Sinclair Memorial Foundation." The accompanying letter was from General Patricia Hayes. Harper, it read, "Your father would be proud of what you've accomplished. The foundation has been established to support military families affected by corruption and cover-ups. We hope you'll consider serving as its first executive director." Harper held the new compass beside her father's original, watching both needles point steadily north. 4 generations of Sinclair military service had led to this moment, not an ending, but a beginning. She thought about the coordinates hidden in her father's compass, about the mass grave at Al-Rashid that had started everything. 3,000 civilians had died for corporate profit, but their deaths would not be forgotten. 7 American soldiers had been murdered for trying to expose the truth, but their sacrifice had meaning. Harper Sinclair had made the hardest shot of her career, not with a rifle, but with courage. She'd hit a target that seemed impossible to reach, justice itself. The needle pointed north, toward truth, toward honor, toward a future where corruption would face consequences and heroes would be remembered. Sometimes the most important mission isn't the one you're given, it's the one you choose for yourself. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't in the killing, but in the saving. Harper opened her father's compass one final time, reading the coordinates that had changed everything. Then she closed it with a decisive click and walked toward her new mission, a foundation that would ensure no soldier's sacrifice for truth would ever be forgotten again. Truth above all. The family motto lived on, carried forward by a new generation ready to honor its price. The shot that mattered most wasn't the one that ended Colonel Morrison's life, it was the one that gave truth a chance to survive. And in the end, that was the only target that really mattered.